folks, welcome back to Anatomy and Physiology on Demand. This is week 12, Monday Lecture A, part 2. And in this section, we're going to learn all about the cerebrum. And so the cerebrum is what people are talking about when they use that laying term, the brain. Okay. And in fact, it is more than 3/4 of the mass of the brain itself and has a lot of various functions. Okay. This is where you do your reasoning, it's where your emotions go, it's where you have all your special senses going to. So it has regular sensory as well and also has motor. If we divide it in half going down the mid-sagittal line, we end up with two hemispheres, a right hemisphere and a left hemisphere. And what is interesting is that the input coming from the right side of the body actually is going to go to the left side of the brain. And the output from the left side of the brain is going to go to the right side of the body. And we will see not in this lecture, but in part 3, how that happens. Something called the decussation, which does not occur in the cerebrum itself. Looking at the cerebrum, the outer couple of millimeters is what is called the cerebral cortex, and this is gray matter. And this is where the conscious mind is found. So in other words, if you have sensory input and you have something going all the way, all these interneurons, and none of them ever take it to the cerebral cortex, you will not be conscious of it. So it's a super important part. And when we come back and we do our special senses pathway, the very last step in every single one is going to be the cortex. You're going to take it to the right part of the brain, and then your last step is cortex. If we look at it histologically, what we would see is that it has all these layers. And by the way, the cerebral cortex, most of the cerebral cortex that we have in humans is something we call the neocortex, which is new cortex. And the reason for that is because how it looks histologically, where it has these 6 layers of these cells that are pyramidal shape and other ones that are kind of star shaped, what we call stellate cells. You're not going to have to learn anything else about that. But when I say it's new cortex, I mean it's only like 60 million years old as opposed to 250 million years old, like seen with other the vertebrates. So if we were to look at the brain, we could do mapping. We can do a little electrophysiology and figure out what's going on. And in fact, the brain has been well mapped, and there's 52 different functional areas. Whew. So if you're taking that psychology class, psychology of the brain, you're going to have to learn a lot more about these functional areas than we are in this class, because we're not going to do 52 functional areas. So this slide is very interesting. It was given to me by a student. It is a pillowcase cover, and one side shows the left brain, the other side shows the right brain. When my child thought this was dirt, and I'm just going, no, that's the nose and the eyeball, just to show you where you are. So feel free to pause and look and see all the cool stuff the left side of the brain does. And then go to the next slide where it's showing the right side, and what you will realize, the right is not a mirror image of the left. Okay, so the right and left side of the brains do not do identical things. They do some things similar and some things dissimilar. So let's talk about the functional areas of the brain that we need to learn about. And this is kind of like the best overall view picture I can show you that is simplified to kind of how we're going to go to. We're going to do a little bit more detail than this, but this is it in its most simplistic form for you to understand. So let's start first with the motor parts of the brain, because those are a small amount of the brain. For the motor area, what you want to do is find that central sulcus and go anterior. So you're in the frontal lobe. So that most posterior gyrus of the frontal lobe, that is your precentral gyrus. And the precentral gyrus is what we call the primary motor cortex. And the reason for that is this has been mapped out, and the more detailed fine movement there is, the bigger representation that there is. So it has nothing to do with the size of your body. For instance, the thigh is quite large, but it doesn't do a whole lot except for kick out with big muscles, so it doesn't need great representation. On the other hand, fingers have a lot of small movements, eyeballs, cheek, tongue, lips have a lot of small movements. So they have great representation of the brain, and this has been mapped out, some little guy called a homunculus. So the proportion correlates with detail, not with body part size. Now, neurons from this area are then going to synapse with other interneurons, and they are going to go anterior in the frontal lobe, what's called the premotor cortex, or the motor association area. Especially if you're trying to learn a new motor skill, like practicing a piece on the piano, practicing your free shot over and over and over and over again, practicing your pathway. Every single time you do it, you are going to make a new synapse in the motor association area, which is a great thing because it means at a time of stress when you need to do it, you haven't just practiced it once, 2 or 3 times. And if those neurons are tired and you're losing, 2/3 of them, that means you only have 1 synapse. But if you've practiced it 100 times, and you still lose 2/3 of them, that means you have 30 synapses, which still have what you like to call muscle memory, but it's no such thing as muscle memory. Okay. Now, there is something really cool on the left side of the brain where this green dot is, just above the temporal lobe, and this is called Broca's area. And this is the part of the brain that's responsible for motor speech production. So it's not the normal area up here where you might think it is, but it is down here by the precentral gyrus, but it goes past the precentral gyrus. So you can still understand, you can still know how to answer, but you will not be able to enunciate an answer. It'll come out gibberish if this part of the brain has been affected with a stroke. So that's it for motor. Everything else in the brain has nothing to, in the cerebrum, excuse me, has nothing to do with motor activity. So let's move to the sensory areas of the brain. So find that central sulcus, go just posterior to it. In the parietal lobe, we had that postcentral gyrus. That postcentral gyrus is known as the primary somatosensory cortex. Some people just call it sensory, but the reason why we like somatosensory, so you understand it's sensory from the body. It is not special senses like vision and smell and hearing and equilibrium. Okay, so that is the primary somatosensory cortex, and then it's going to have an association area as well, which is just going to be more posterior in the parietal lobe. So let's stay with, oh, and by the way, this postcentral gyrus also has a little homunculus, which is mapped out. So areas that have greater sensory input are going to have greater representation. Okay, getting back to other sensory areas of the brain that are not somatosensory. The occipital lobe is the part of the brain associated with vision. There's a primary area and the rest is a visual association area. The temporal lobe does several things. It does hearing, and there's a huge auditory association area. It also is going to have an area for smell. And then if you go in through that lateral fissure in there where we have the insula is going to be very, or also right here on this coronal view. The insula is, as we will see later, is going to be important for taste, but it also is an important area for pain as well. So I talked previously about Broca's area, which was a special area for speech motor. Now there's also another special area for speech sensory, for understanding what is being said. And that is way back here, as you can see where this gold thing is, and that's called Wernicke's area. Okay. So if this part is wiped out, then the person really doesn't understand what's being said. Okay, and will only be able to be a non-responsive person. Okay. So as you can see, words and communication super complicated. For reading the words, we have the occipital lobe. For hearing the words, We have temporal lobe for understanding the words. We have Wernicke's area for thinking about words and figuring out how to produce the language and move stuff around. We have Broca's area, and then for actually saying the words, we have the precentral gyrus. So there's a lot going on. So at this point, I have two different homunculuses here. And what I would like you to do is to pause this in a second and look and compare the two. Where are the discrepancies? Like they both have big lips, so lips isn't going to help you. You've got big representation for motor, you've got big representation for sensory. But look at the parts that are different and figure out which one of these, the one in the black background or the one in the white background, which one is for motor and which one is for sensory. So go ahead and freeze it and figure this out before you come back. Okay, welcome back. You have your answer? Is this what you came up with? Good. All right, if you had trouble coming up with this, you need to be explained, then shoot me an email or come see me Wednesday during office hours or ask me for office hours before the Wednesday class. So let's talk about the two sides of your brain and about being handed. So there's a huge misconception that we're only using like 5% of our brain at any one time, when in reality, we're using 90% of our brain all of the time. And there's a huge misconception that we use one side. If you're right-handed, you use one side of the brain and not the other. If you're left-handed, you use one side and not the other. Okay, so those are both misconceptions. But let me tell you what is different about the two sides of your brain. And I'm going to say this is how it works for 90% of the population. If you're right-handed, this is how it pretty much works for you. Well, actually, this is how it is. Okay. The left side of the brain is more involved with logical stuff, including language, even though there's no logic to the English language. Okay. But math skills, speech skills, your science people use the left side of your brain all the time, speaking. Whereas in contrast, the right side of your brain is your more creative side. So your artistic skills, look at your intuition, looking at patterns and at space and stuff like that. So there's so many science people who say like, I can't draw. And so many artistic people that say, I can't balance my checkbook. Yes, you can. You just have to get those neurons on the other side of the brain working hard. Now, what happens oftentimes with the real sciencey people, when they look at art, they try to start analyzing and figure out the little pattern or whatever, and they're not appreciating it as an art or something like that. And one of the best things you possibly can do is like look at it backwards in a mirror or look at it upside down. And this is something I do all the time with my bio people who are having to look at chromosomes and pair them up and they're getting stuck and they can't figure it out. I said, get up and look at them from the other side. So you're looking at it upside down. So you are not able to compare the little tiny details. And so now you're looking at the artistic, the big picture is showing to you. And so you can pick out where something sticks out that isn't normal. Okay. So people who tend to be right brain dominant, most of them are going to be left-handed. Whereas people who tend to be left brain dominant, most of them are going to be right-handed. And if you want to really get an assessment if you think this is true or not, 90% of the population is naturally right-handed and 10% is going to be left-handed. Does that mean a left-handed person is not good in science? Absolutely not. My brother-in-law is a cardiologist and he is left-handed, but he golfs right-handed, whereas my ex is right-handed and he plays all his sports left-handed. Okay. Why? Because his mother was left-handed, and so that's how he learned to do everything. So you actually can use both sides of your brains wonderfully. If you actually look at Oscar time and at Emmy's time, what you will notice is more than 10% of the people getting those awards are left-handed. So there's a huge artistic community out there because they tend to definitely be right brain dominant people. Okay, now, a lot of you science people were forced, or your parents like to say, had the privilege. They spent their hard-earned money buying you music lessons, okay? And some of you liked it, but a lot of you hated it. This is a time where you now need to go back to your parents and thank you for that. Because if you learn music, then you understand that music is very artistic, but it's also mathematical, right? You got to count. You got to keep on tempo. Even if you're doing jazz, you have to be on the off beat, not on the beat, in order to get those riffs and things going. And so what we have found in people who develop music skills is their corpus callosum, that's connecting the right side and the left side of the brain, is bigger than normal, especially if you start in childhood. So if you started taking music lessons by the time you were 6, 10, 13 years old, then your corpus callosum is probably 25, up to 25% bigger than the people who did not have the privilege of taking those music lessons. So yes, everybody go thank their parents for that, because I know you all are living at home right now. Okay, now this is one of those slides that I really tried to avoid showing to you, because it's showing so much detail, so many things we haven't talked about, so many details, and I like to keep the slides really clean. So I'm not going to use this slide. I'm just using this slide to show you what I'm not showing you to make you feel better. But what we are going to talk now is some parts of the brain, specifically I'm going to talk about 3 of them, which associate different things. It's not just vision, or it's not just this, okay? And these association areas kind of help us determine who we are and how we act the way we act and what we think the way we think. The first of these is what's called the posterior association area, which is this area where you can see that pink, like swoosh, Nike swoosh thing going through. So there's a lot of temporal lobe and it goes into occipital lobe. And this is the part of the brain that allows you to recognize patterns, which your face is a pattern of, and allows you to recognize you as yourself. So if you see a picture of yourself now, even though you've never seen the picture before, you recognize it as you. And the other thing you can do is you can ask your parents, go out, take pictures of you and your siblings when you're all like 3 years old, and you can pick yourself out of all of those. You can pick out who's who on them, because you are able to recognize yourself as yourself. So it's kind of a cool, because it does that, also where you are in space, and helps you with your understanding. Now, the prefrontal cortex, this place is amazing. All right, so I am not talking the precentral gyrus. I am not talking the motor association area. I am talking go all the way to the most anterior part of your frontal lobe, okay? This is called the prefrontal cortex. And this part connects with the part of your brain related to impulse control and emotions. And we learned a lot about this brain because of this guy named Phineas Gage, who was a really cool guy. And he was a foreman, and they were digging tunnels through mountains so that railroads could go through. And he had one of the best crews for doing this. And so he would come every day and tell the crew what they wanted to do. They would dig the little holes. They had these big poles with the, and they would go in there and they put the TNT, and then they would put the cotton padding, and they would tap it down, and then have the cord, and then, you know, fire in the hole, and it would explode and all that. Okay. So one day he didn't have his normal pole, and so he borrowed this pole, which had a point on it. And he was tamping down, and I don't know if there wasn't enough cotton batting or what happened, but anyway, the whole thing exploded on him. Okay. And this pole went through, you can see right there, went through the upper part of his orbit, and it came out through the top part of his brain, and he had this big hole in his brain, okay? And he got blown out, okay? And so he came to, and he was like, obviously not acting normal. And so they took him to the doctor on the site, and the doctor on the site just thought he was drunk. And they said, no, just exploded. And they go, well, the reason why it exploded is because he forgot to put the batting in because he's drunk. And then he vomited, and he actually vomited up brain matter. And that's when the doctor said, oh, maybe your story makes sense. And so he went to the hospital. Long story short, he almost died from massive infections, but he lived. And 6 months later, he came back and got his job as foreman. Only now, when he was a foreman, as opposed to before, where they would always get the job done ahead of time and they would get all these bonuses, now he would give out the jobs. And then a couple hours later, he goes, no, here's plan B, blah, 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 blah. People get work. Nope, here's plan C. And so everybody kept on quitting, and he became a very mean person, and he got kicked out of his home, and a whole bunch of stuff went wrong. He could not figure out the master plan, and he could not stay on task. And so we know a lot about the prefrontal cortex because basically his was blown out and he did not have it. He survived, but without a prefrontal cortex. And so we now say that the prefrontal cortex is super important for critical thinking. And by critical thinking, you know, those are the questions when I give you in class and I ask you, okay, see if you can work your way through that. As far as a job, it means you need to be able to pull all the parts together. So you need to understand the billing and the payroll, as well as the ordering, as well as the execution. How many workers do I need this day? And do I have enough supplies in? And it's going to be a Sunday, so I need more, I need less, all those kinds of things. So all these executive functions that, to be honest, you're not going to have the day you graduate college, okay? There does take some time to develop these. Also along in here, it has to do with risks and consequences. And so go back and ask your parents. You know how your parents are saying, no, you can't do that, it's dangerous. And you're going, it seems fine to me. They're, no, you can't do that, it's dangerous. Okay. Like I'm sure you see every spring break, you can hear about people that went down to Cabo or someplace and they did their cliff jumping or whatever, or their cliff diving, and they end up being paralyzed. Okay, because they thought it was fine because they saw 20 other people to do it, but what they didn't realize was the 20 other people had to do with the tides and the moon and the this and the that, and timing it with the waves. And whereas when they were jumping, there was 20 feet of water, but when this person jumped, there was only 6 feet of water. Okay, so that's the risks and your consequences. So feel free to go back and ask your parents, what did they do in high school and college, or when they were that age that they don't want to tell you about? Okay, I know personally my mother hitchhiked across Canada. She flatly denies it, but my grandmother and her siblings all say she hitchhiked across Canada one summer. Okay, so how can we develop this prefrontal cortex? Well, when you're a child, every single time your parent told you, no, you can't do it, it's dangerous, they were helping develop your prefrontal cortex. So feel free to thank them for that as well. All right, the next topic we want to talk about in the cerebrum is something called the limbic system. I know Dr. Shopi called it the fifth lobe, but it's not really a lobe. It's a functional grouping because it's not a lobe like the frontal lobe's a lobe or any of that kind of stuff. Part of it's part of the cerebrum and part of it's other stuff. So there's a whole bunch of stuff on this slide, which I'm not necessarily going to talk about in detail, but it's kind of interesting to read. So I would suggest, like, you know, look. I think you have the slides, so just look at it on your slide and just read it. It kind of helps you understand the limbic system. So the part of the limbic system that's in the cerebrum that's easy for us to see is the cingulate gyrus, which is the gyrus that is just superficial to the corpus callosum, kind of like a C sitting like this. Okay. There is more cerebrum that is visible, but it's all deep. You can't see it. Other parts of the limbic system besides this orangey cingulate gyrus will include the thalamus and the hypothalamus, which you know about. A whole bunch of parts you don't know about yet. Olfactory bulb, you'll learn about later. This little thing over here is called the hippocampus, which is kind of shaped like a seahorse, which has to do with spatial navigation. So it kind of fits with, like, you know, the sea and spatial navigation. But here's the biggie about the limbic system. The big things that it does. Number one, biological drives, things you must do. And now it's usually when I ask the class, tell me some things you feel like at times you've got to do to survive. Some people will say eat, and I go, yep, that's true. And other people will say have sex. I'm going, yep, because both of those are biological drives. It also has to do with emotions, and it also has to do with memory formation. Okay? And so if you think about emotions, like, what do a lot of us do when we're really upset and we're stressed? We stress eat, right? You see it on TV all the time. People sitting there like they broke up the boyfriend, their girlfriend, they're sitting there eating the pint of Haagen-Dazs. It's not because you're hungry. It's this emotional biological drive interface, having you eat. And it also has to do with memory formation. So here's the thing. I'm going to talk about memory on the last part of this one, not this part, but the last part of 12A. If you want to make stronger memories, tie it to something that makes you emotional. Okay. Like, I'm sure all of you remember something that really upset you, and you will be able to remember it for the next 20 years of your life. Especially, it's like, oh my God, even like in school, I got that stupid question wrong. And I knew the answer. You're going to remember the question you got wrong because it's upsetting you. You're not going to remember the 85,000 questions you got right because there's no emotion associated with them. Okay? So get emotional about stuff. It helps create memories. Limbic system also has to do with fear, danger, anxiety, and pleasure. As you can see, those are all emotion related. And it's also where we're going to consolidate short-term and long-term memory. Come back and talk about that with memory later on. So that brings us to the white matter in the cerebrum. And as you recall, the white matter is what part? That's right. It is the axons of the neurons, and they travel together in the brain. And in the peripheral nervous system, we call those nerves. But inside the brain matter, we call those groups of axons tracts. Okay. So we have 3 different types of tracts of white matter. And I think I have put all 3 on the same slide for you, but for simplicity of me explaining them, I made 3 subsequent slides. So don't be flipping through looking for the next slides, because for you, I think it's all on this slide. The first type of tracts are known as association tracts, and association tracts are those that stay within the same hemisphere. So they're either in the right hemisphere or they're in the left hemisphere, and that means they're going to go in an anterior posterior direction in that hemisphere. Okay, yes, there can be a little bit superior inferior with that one, because you can go up to the top of the gyrus as well. So you can stay within the same lobe, or you can go between adjacent lobes, or you can go all the way from anterior posterior, or you can go here to the temporal lobe. And so the 2 pictures on the right are basically scanning electron micrograph picture where they have picked out the actual fibers, the axons of these tracts, and you can see the upper one is this lateral view, just like the drawing to the left, and the lower one's a coronal view looking from above, so you can see things going not only anterior posterior, but you also can see them going laterally as well. So that's the first of the 3 association tracts. The second one are called commissural tracts, and these are crossing between the right and the left. Can you see that there in your picture? They're crossing, okay? In this structure in the midline. What's that structure called in the midline? That's right, the corpus callosum. So the commissural fibers are crossing in the corpus callosum to get to the other hemisphere. And the third and final type of tracts are called projection tracts, and those are going in a superior inferior direction. I know at first glance this looks like cauliflower, but it really isn't. This is the pons. There's the medulla oblongata. There's the midbrain. So there's your brainstem. And then these are the gyri and the cell side going from the frontal lobe all the way back here to the occipital lobe. So these are ascending and descending. So if we start, for instance, on the right side of the brain, those would be motor ones descending. They descend through the cerebrum. They're going to go into the brainstem, and they're actually going to cross to the other side in the medulla oblongata. There's that decussation again happening in the medulla oblongata. So they are going to cause motor movement on the left side of the body. So that's how descending would work. It's descending from the left side, it still decussates, and then it affects the right side of the body. Similarly, if they are ascending, that means they are sensory fibers. And so if they're ascending on the right side of the spinal cord, when they reach the medulla oblongata, they're going to decussate over to the left. And so then they would go to sensory areas on the left side. And the same thing if they're originating on the left, they would end up on the right. Okay, so hopefully now you understand the 3 different types of tracts. So that's the white matter. Now, if we go deep to the white matter, we still have several areas of gray matter that are very deep. So we had the surface gray matter, which was the cerebral cortex. Then we have all this white matter with all those various kind of tracts. And then very deep, we have areas of gray matter known as the basal nuclei. Some books, and I'm not sure about McKinley, call these basal ganglia, but remember a ganglion technically is outside the central nervous system, so that's kind of a misnomer. So most people switch to the term basal nuclei. And these have to do with regulating movement and regulating unconscious thought. And they are going to be parts of the midbrain and areas surrounding the thalamus, and we're really not going to talk very much about them. But if you had, for instance, a stroke that affected this, that would also give you a motor deficit, just as if you had a stroke that affected the primary motor cortex would give you a motor deficit. Okay, so that's it for the cerebrum. I want to thank all of you for continuing to work hard, and I will see all of you for part 3.